Shavua Tov, Gudvach. We're learning Mesilas Yesharim. We're on the chapter about Nikius, spiritual cleanliness, about how a person achieves the level of being clean from sin. And part of being clean from sin is also being clean from having bad character traits. So now the Ramchal is going through various bad character traits that a person can have, and different ways it expresses itself, and how to guard from having those bad traits. So now we're talking about Gaiva. Gaiva, which we learned, is haughtiness, where we think that we are the center of creation and everything should bend to our will, and we think the whole world basically revolves around us. Now that doesn't mean that we don't recognize certain strengths we have. It doesn't mean having low self-esteem. We should all recognize that God blessed us with certain strengths and certain things that we can accomplish, but we should recognize that those are gifts from Hashem and that it's up to us to use them in the proper way, but we shouldn't be haughty about it. And if we think about it logically, very often we don't, but everyone has a Yetzer Hara, has a desire of, for self-aggrandizement, to be honored. It's a desire for honor, which is a very strong desire, right? We all want to feel important, but we have to remember that in the end of the day, it doesn't matter, because whether we like it or not, after 120 years, we're not going to be here anymore, and it's all not going to matter. Right? You think about somebody that works for a company for 30, 40 years, and he's the senior vice president, and everyone gives him honor, and he's so important, and he has all these important jobs, but after he retires, everybody forgets about him. No one cares what he did. Someone once made a point, a rabbi once made a point about honor and said, Shavua Tov, thanks for coming. He said, who was the 19th president? So most people, unless you're a historian or like a little bit of a nerd, you're not going to know off the cuff who the 19th president was. But at the time, when the 19th president was president, he was the most honorable person in the country, right? Everyone wanted to give him honor. He was so important. Everyone deferred to him, showed him respect and deference. But now, a couple 150 years later, nobody even remembers who the 19th president was. So I heard a story from somebody. He once went to a nursing home, and he saw in the nursing home, it was very sad, it was a prominent doctor, a physician. He discovered many, or pioneered, I think, a certain technique in like gastric surgery or something like that, something with the intestines. And when he was practicing, he was a very famous doctor. Everyone gave him honor. He was very important. But now, 30 years later, 40 years later, his technique that he pioneered is obsolete. Nobody remembers him, and unfortunately, he's alone in a nursing home, and that's it. Because eventually, it happens to all of us. We're not going to be here anymore, and all of that honor is just really illusory. That it doesn't really matter in the end of the day. So now the Ramchal is discussing different ways that Gaiva, arrogance, self-importance, reflects itself in people's actions. So let's continue. We use the Art Scroll edition, the Art Scroll elucidated edition. We're on page 237, and we're in the middle of chapter 11. V'imatze geye acher, we find other types of balagaiva, arrogant people. Sherotzo lios nirsham harbe b'ma'alosav ulehis yached b'drachav. They want to be praised, and they want people to know about how special they are. Ad shelo dai lo sheyahalu kol ha'olam ala milos asher hu choshev sheyesh bo, where it comes to the point that it's not enough that people praise them for all how great they are. But they're very arrogant, and they act very humble. Right? They purposely show how humble they are, because not only do they want people to say, to praise all of their character traits, what they believe are their positive character traits, but they even want people to say how humble they are. Oh, this guy, he's such a humble person, right? He does, he's such a great man. He expresses his humility, and he doesn't want anyone to know what he does. He actually becomes haughty in his humility. He actually gains honor by showing himself as running away from honor. Right? Let's say somebody comes to somebody in the shul and says, "Please sit up front. I would like you to. You're a very honorable person. I would like you to sit in front of the synagogue." So the guy, says, "Oh no, I can't do that. I'm so humble. I can't do that." And he makes a big deal about that everyone should see how he's running away from honor. A truly humble person wouldn't do that. He a humble person, someone who's really humble, who exhibits humility. He does it in a quiet way. I mentioned last week about certain religious figures in certain religions that they do acts of humility, but they do it in front of the cameras because they want everyone to see how humble they are. A real humble person doesn't do that. I mentioned a rabbi in Ner Yisrael that he goes around collecting garbage at like 4 in the morning, so nobody sees what he's doing. To keep the campus clean, to keep the yeshiva campus clean, right? He doesn't do it in the middle of the day, so people can see him and say, "Oh, look at that great rabbi! He's so humble. He cleans up the garbage." No, he does it in the early morning before anyone's up, so nobody knows what he's doing. People who are really humble, they don't have to show their humility. But so the Ramchal is saying that people can be so arrogant that even the expression of their humility, or quote unquote humility, is really an expression of their arrogance. Vihine, these type of arrogant people, they place themselves in the lowly people, or they hang around the people that are the low people in society, because they want people to see how humble they are. They pretend that they don't want any honor, and they reject any forms of honor. However, their hearts inside of them say, they say, I'm the most humble person in the world. When it comes to humility, I'm the greatest. This is what these people say. Right, a good way to see if you're doing something for the right reasons is if you do it when there's nobody watching. Right, but these people, they act humble and they make sure that everyone's watching. These people, even though they portray themselves as humble, they're still going. They have many stumbling blocks. He says that in the end of the day, people are going to realize what these people are all about. These people that pretend that they're humble. Just like a flame passes through pottery shards, you can see the flame, and the pottery shards do nothing to stop the flame. These people will be revealed. The rabbis gave a parable for this type of thing. It's like a house that's full of straw. A house that had a bunch of holes. So people would put straw to cover the holes. Eventually, after this person kept filling his house with holes with straw, the straw started coming out. So eventually, people realized that the entire house was full of straw. The same thing here. These people who pretend to be humble, they can't always hide themselves. Their evil intent will eventually be recognized through their actions. Their ways are through how they translate it? Counterfeit humility and deceitful lowliness. So he's saying that these people that are not really humble, but they just act like they're humble, but they're really arrogant, eventually people will realize what they're all about. Most people, eventually, if you hang around them long enough, you figure what they are all about. It's interesting, and the opposite is true with great people. Probably mentioned this before, that Rav Elchanan Wasserman said at the Chafetz Chaim's funeral that when it comes to famous people in the secular world, usually the way it goes is, they start off as like great people. People, their first impression is that they're great people, but the more you find out about them in their personal life, turns out that they weren't such great people, and that they were really actually horrible people. I think of like FDR. People, you look at him at a superficial historical view. He got America out of the Great Depression. He won World War II. But then you start finding out about his personal life, about how anti-Semitic he was, and how he didn't save Jews, and how he cheated on his wife, and just how he didn't treat people properly. And you realize the more you find out about FDR, you realize what kind of horrible person he actually was. But Rav Elchanan said the opposite is true of Gedolei Yisrael. The more you find out about the Gedolei Yisrael, meaning great rabbis and great leaders of the Jewish people, the more you find out about them, the more impressed you are, and the more things you find out about them. The more you hang out around big rabbis, the real big rabbis that really mean what they learn and practice what they preach, you realize that in their personal lives they're even more impressive than they appear in their public lives. And this is definitely true across the board. Okay, let's continue. We find other types of. So that was one group of haughty people. The group of haughty people that makes themselves appear that they are very humble, but in the end of the day, they're not, and they're going to be discovered. They are other arrogant people. Lo yotzieu elamaisa. Their arrogance is something which is hidden inside of them, meaning they have the feelings of arrogance, but it doesn't express them so much into action. They think in their heads that they're very wise and they know everything. And there's very few people that are as wise as them. So therefore, when they want to make a decision, they don't consult with anybody else because they figure they're so wise. If I don't understand it, these people for sure aren't going to understand it. And they don't listen to anyone with a different opinion. They don't have any question on their logic. Right? It's very important. Really humble people, when they are deciding something. Even I think you find this. By people that are at the top of their fields, that really understand how complex their field might be, whether it's a doctor that really understands medicine, he'll understand that there's many things that he doesn't know. He understands how great the human body is and how complicated it is, and he's not arrogant to know that he thinks he knows everything, so he'll consult with other doctors. Versus sometimes you have a doctor who just started out and he doesn't even realize how complicated the body is, so he thinks he knows everything, and therefore he won't consult with other professionals. It doesn't have to be a doctor. That was just an example that came into my head. When it comes to anybody, right? The people that are really wise, they recognize what they don't know, and they recognize that they have to consult with other people. But an arrogant person in his heart, he thinks, I'm so smart. So if I don't understand it, for sure nobody else is going to understand it. There's no point of me even asking anybody else. So kol ela toldos hagaiva hamashiva chachamim achar v'daitem esakelas. Second. So he says all of these attitudes are outgrowths of haughtiness, and it causes wise people to be foolish. Masir lev roshei hachachma, and it even attacks very wise people. Va'afki talmidim shelo yishimshu kol tzarcham shenifchu eineihem kvar chachmei chacham shavim lehem belibam, and this affects wise people that don't realize that what they don't know, and especially people that are just starting out, just students that are just starting out, think they know everything, that they don't have to consult with anybody. And all these people, it says in Proverbs, To'avas Hashem kol gvalev. Someone who's arrogant is an abomination to Hashem. Right? It's a very strong word, to be an abomination. The Torah uses the word abomination by something which is very detestable to Hashem. So someone who's arrogant is very detestable to God. Umikulam tzarich sheinake harotzav minas hanikiyos. Now, somebody who wants to acquire this attribute which we're discussing of spiritual cleanliness has to become clean of all of these aspects of haughtiness. V'yeda v'yavan, he has to know and understand ki ein hagaiva ele ivaron mamish asher ein seichel adam roach hasronaisav umakir b'chisuso. He says arrogance, haughtiness, self-importance, honor, it's just something which blinds a person so he doesn't recognize his own shortcomings. Right? An arrogant person thinks he's the best. He doesn't stop and think, and analyze himself. Maybe there's certain things that I'm lacking in. It's very important in life, right? We can't grow as people unless we recognize the things that we lack in, the things that we need improvement. The arrogant person thinks he's perfect. If this arrogant person would recognize the truth, he would distance himself as much as he could from this bad character trait. We'll talk more about this when we talk about the trait of humility, because of the difficulty in acquiring it. Husma b'divrei Rabbi Pinchas min ha'achronos. Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair put it at the end. Right? The Sefer Mesilas Yesharim, we're learning different steps up the ladder to spiritual perfection, and we're now in the step of Nikius, of spiritual cleanliness. But towards the end of the ladder, meaning after one is very close to spiritual perfection, is anava, is humility. So the Ramchal says that the reason Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, who the Sefer is based on, his spiritual ladder is placed at the end, is because anava, humility, is something that's very difficult to achieve. Right? But all of these things, it's not all or nothing. It's something that we should know, that there is a goal. The ideal is to be humble people and to not be arrogant. And we take steps, little steps to get there, and however that is, to not exhibit this trait of arrogance. But it's something which takes a lifetime to work on, because we all have that drive to feel important. Everyone wants to feel important and to be honored. But if we recognize to ourselves that we weren't put in this world to receive honor, to be important, Hashem put us in this world to get close to Him, to do a mission, and if our motivations in life is that we want to serve Hashem and do the best that we can in that mission, then we won't focus so much on honor and haughtiness and things of that nature. So next week, God willing, we'll talk about the next character trait that we have to work on, which is kas, which is anger. And I think the Ramchal put it next to haughtiness and self-importance and arrogance, because anger is a natural outgrowth of a person who's haughty. Or if we think about it, someone who's haughty and someone who thinks he's the most important thing, he gets angry because, well, this person is doing something against my will. He's interfering with something that I want to do. He's coming against me. Who does he think he is? And that generates a feeling of anger. So next week, God willing, we'll talk about the attribute of anger and how to avoid it. And with that, hope everyone has a great week.